Big Blue Book Club presents Snack Club with Courtney Luecking and Anna Cason, featuring raising a happy, healthy eater and how to raise a mindful eater. Now, here are our hosts.
Feeding children is an adventure, and at some point or another, you might have had questions like, am I doing this right? Or is this normal?
Headlines, things we see online, things we hear from family and friends, and even unpacking what we see in the store can have us questioning what to feed our children. We want children to have what they need to lead happy, healthy lives, and it seems like as soon as we figure something out, it changes.
That's where we come in. My name is Dr. Courtney Luecking. I'm a registered dietitian and extension specialist for family and child nutrition. This means I have lots of training and expertise about child nutrition. I also have two littles of my own. This combination allows me to talk through practical, science-based strategies for creating a nourishing feeding environment for your family.
And my name is Anna Cason. I'm a registered dietitian and extension associate in food and nutrition. I don't have kids of my own, but my interests and passion lie in supporting healthy food-related behaviors, which begin in childhood.
In partnership with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Services, we present Snack Club, where we share bite-sized bits of information for supporting nourished, active children in Kentucky.
So come for the snacks and stay for the support.
Hi, Anna.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well.
I'm so glad to be back again.
Here we are.
I'm excited, and a little nervous to talk about today's topic.
Yes.
Reframing how we talk about food.
Kind of a touchy subject.
It can be, and I think a real opportunity for growth for all of us.
I like the term opportunity.
Yeah, so because we think about food, well, some of us maybe more than others, all day. What are we eating next? When are we eating next? And so we're talking about it in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and we may not be realizing how we talk about it.
Yes, and so the words we use, the tones that we use when we're talking about food or around children, just around those eating experiences, they have such a long-term impact.
Yeah, well, in body language, I always think of if someone offers a food and you shudder or you act like repulsed by it, then just like the way all things that surround food that we may not typically think about has a big impact.
Yes, so let's get started right away talking about kind of the relationships that we have with food, this healthy, I'm gonna use air quotes when I say healthy relationship with food. What does that look like, or what could that look like?
Yeah, so I think it's just like we talked about before, like healthy can be subjective. It can be different for everyone. And a healthy relationship with food can be different from person to person. So a lot of times you approach food in a way that's joyful and you enjoy the experience of eating food, but it doesn't control your life by any means, whether like over controlling or forgetting about food. Like just it's there, we need it, but not stressed about it.
Yeah, I think you bring up some important points because as you were talking, I'm thinking about how people might be responding in their heads about this. Well, gosh, thinking about eating stresses me out, or I have a lot of rules or things around eating, and I think that speaks, or food is love, and so that speaks to the food culture that we have in our country.
Yeah,
and I thought our books, both of our books, actually touched on this terminology, and so just want to quick read what the definition, this idea of food culture. We may not have thought about it this way before, but Marguerite Fletcher, who's a dietitian, does a lot with mindful eating, wrote one of her books, This Complex Relationship Between Food, Eating, and Nourishment Becomes a Culture. As families grow, this culture and common food choices fades away to become a series of invisible habits. Every family and childcare center has a food culture that is unique. That just really resonated with me. So wanted to ask you what your food culture was like growing up.
It was, I would say typical, but I don't think I know otherwise, really. It's just what I grew up with. It was normal. We typically did like family dinners at night, especially when we were younger, but then when we got older, schedules were busier, so it was harder and harder. Sundays we would go to my granddad's for dinner. It was just,
So kind of a rhythm and routine to what you...
routine. In the mornings we would do breakfast before school, pack lunches, and then dinner together at night.
Yeah. And so it sounds like it was a pretty positive or maybe neutral experience. And
Pleasant. Yeah.
want to recognize that that may not be the case for many
Yeah.
people who are listening.
Yeah,
And that,
absolutely.
yeah, like how we grew up, it may have been a very lonely or unsure about like, what are we going to eat for a meal, or just a lot of rules and rigidity. I'm thinking about like, can't get up from the table till you are finished eating type of thing.
Yeah.
And so
Clean plate club.
yes. So that I think is a great example of what a food culture could be growing up. And so clean plate club, I think many of us have probably heard it before, like can't get up till you eat all of this, or someone telling us you haven't had enough. And so what are maybe some of the challenges, or let's use the word concerns, when we're talking about language around food and we're trying to tell a child you haven't eaten enough yet? What are some of the concerns around that?
Yeah, so a lot of it has to do with like the outside influence of someone telling them when they have had enough or when they haven't had enough versus listening to their body's cues, their hunger and fullness cues. So if they're satisfied with what they ate, they're not hungry anymore, then their body will tell them that. But if someone is telling them, no, you haven't had enough, you need to finish whatever's on the plate, then that's conflicting for them because they're getting one message from internally and then externally another message. And so it really takes away from listening to their own hunger and fullness cues.
Yeah. And I think where that can become concerning, not only in the short term, but the long term, I think I've chatted with many adults who are like, that sticks in my mind. And so I might be out to eat and I see my plate, and in the back of my mind, it's like, you haven't finished everything on your plate. And so it carries over time, the ways that we're interacting with children around food or talking about it.
Well, absolutely. And once you are older and you start buying your own groceries, then it becomes a concern of, well, am I wasting food if I haven't finished what I'm eating and essentially throwing away money? I mean, it's just a whole nother aspect of it.
And yeah, I hadn't really thought about that before, just like the intensity of
Yeah,
seemingly
the
small things that we say. And so
Yeah.
this is like, oh my gosh, as a person who cares for young people, that's stressful. Like, what should I do differently? You know, and I think this is where, because some of the nutrition information we talked about, like what to feed children to support growth, hasn't changed a whole lot over time.
Yeah.
But the language, the research around that continues to evolve. So I think first, like taking a step back, giving ourselves some grace.
Yeah.
This is, I know, an area that I'm continuing to work in, thinking about things that were said to me growing up. My parents were doing the best they could, and so I hold nothing against them. And recognizing that, like, when you want to do differently sometimes, and
we now have some guidance as to what can be said and when it can be said. So just again, giving yourself grace and just realizing, okay, now there are some things that I can think about.
Yeah. So let's first start talking about some opportunities of when we are talking to children about food. Obviously, we can think of mealtime or snack time. So when we're sitting down to eat, and the language we're using around that. So the clean plate club, we talked about that. So instead of saying, you haven't had enough to eat, or you need to clean your plate, what might be an idea that we could say differently that is more neutral?
Yeah. So instead of telling them when they have or hadn't had enough, phrasing it as a question, have you had enough? Are you still hungry? Are you feeling satisfied? And really letting them kind of check in with how they're feeling after their meal or snack and telling you.
I like
It's a place to start.
Yeah. And not hopefully too challenging. Might have to like pause, catch ourselves, and that's okay.
Yeah. Take a breath.
And letting our children know that we're trying to do things differently. I think letting them see that human factor of like, oh, I mean, whoops, let me ask you, like, have you had enough to eat yet? I like that. Okay, so meal times. When are some other opportunities in day-to-day or weekly that we could interact with children around food?
Well, I think about the media influence, whether it's billboards when you're driving down the road or commercials on TV or walking around the grocery store. And it seems like all the tasty treats are at perfect eye level for little hands to grab. So just recognizing it and having a conversation about it.
Yes, sometimes I've been at the grocery with my kids and I all of a sudden look in the cart and there's something extra in there. I'm like, wait a second. So a great conversation about, and we've noticed ads more because we've had more screen time. But I think the Raising a Happy, Healthy Eater book, they go into this a little bit more, talking about food advertising, and that even as young as preschool, children are consuming multiple food ads a day. And usually it's not advertisements for like broccoli or almonds or something, eggs even. And so helping have those conversations. So again, thinking about how can we put a more positive or even neutral, not everything is rainbows and sunshine. So just a more neutral, helping children recognize what is happening. Those media influences, they are trying to sell you something. And then use that as a way to talk about whether or how you incorporate those foods in your home. This is not a food that we eat in our house. Kind of end of story. Or, oh gosh, that does look yummy. And then maybe saying that might be something we could add as a treat one day or something like
we
that.
Could have it later, but right now we have this for lunch or snack or something.
Yeah. I always like to think about grocery shopping too as a way, or if it's not grocery shopping, however you're getting food or wherever you're getting food, bringing children along. I know that sounds great in theory, so I'm not saying you have to do it all the time, but they can learn a lot. So the youngest can learn recognition, like matching names to things that they are. And as children get older, they can start to have a more active role. And then kind of with that invisible, like these invisible habits remain, kind of what kinds of foods are selected at the store, helping explain to children like why that we choose these foods or why maybe we don't choose other foods. And that could be cost, or if you're getting local foods, it could be to support your neighbors. And maybe it's based on taste. Or maybe it's to help them pick something new, but all of those are experiential, hands-on ways that we can get children. We can talk about food with children that are maybe outside the potentially stressful meal times where you're wanting them to eat.
Well, and like you mentioned, those habits will carry on forward for when they're older, and then they can do the same thing with their littles.
What about gardening? What are some ways we could use gardening as a way to talk about food?
So really it provides the opportunity for kids to see where some foods come from, like from the very beginning, and the opportunity to watch these foods grow and have an active role in caring for foods that they will eventually eat one day creates this excitement about the whole learning process of seeing this food come up from the ground.
Okay, so we've talked about a couple everyday scenarios when we can talk about food. Let's do a little bit more about how, like what to say, because I think sometimes this is the most challenging. And so I think one tip I like to always remind myself is to keep it objective, not kind of this good or bad morality. And I know you and I have talked about this before, so I'm gonna let you kind of talk about what we mean when we say that morality around food.
So really, when we think about it, we as a culture have deemed foods good or bad, and essentially there is no good food and bad food, but depending on what the food provides us or doesn't provide us, we just have declared foods as good foods, like good for you foods or bad for you foods, when really, I mean, all foods can be good foods and there are no bad foods. Foods are going to provide you with something in the very least. So really taking a step back and not saying, like, for example, if we're eating spinach, instead of saying eat your spinach because it's good for you, but explaining why, or talking about the texture or the color, or just identifying it in a way that, depending on the age of your child, they can connect with it. So providing some background versus the morality of it.
Yes, you brought up so many good points there. So just want to kind of explore them a little bit more. This developmentally appropriate. Children, again, as young as preschool age, are able to start learning about what foods do in their body. But knowledge does not translate to behavior. So it's easy for children to categorize, right? And as children get older, they start to have a greater understanding of more complex things. So, what's orange helps us see for a preschooler might be, oh, this carrot has vitamin A, and getting kind of more detailed as we go. But so being developmentally appropriate when we talk about those things, but you hit on the more objective things, like the healthy, unhealthy isn't going to sell a kid to eat something
Yeah.
or an adult,
Yeah.
taste is really where
Yeah.
it's at. So I think highlighting the taste, can you link it to something children are more familiar with? Or if this is a strawberry, it is sweet.
Yeah.
It's red.
It's bumpy.
Mhm.
It's just to prepare them for what they're about to eat and creating some excitement around it. Like, oh, this is sweet. It's yummy.
Yes, so adventurous, also familiarity.
Mhm.
All children are different. Some won't hesitate to try something new, and some will. And so that makes me think about picky eating. So
Yeah.
maybe let's go there. Let's talk about this term picky eating, and then we can circle back with kind of the how
Yeah.
we talk about foods.
So I love in Raising a Healthy, Happy Eater, they had this analogy comparing picky eating to like learning to read.
Yes,
It's one
I
of my
love that.
favorite parts of the book. So they, just to summarize, they essentially say you wouldn't label your child as a bad reader. If they're first learning to read and they're struggling, you wouldn't put it out there. So why do we do that with picky eating? Essentially, it's setting them up to, or connecting them with this label and then potentially leading them to just accept this and then use that moving forward as a reason for not trying new foods or as a reason for their hesitancy with foods or something versus rephrasing it in a different way.
Yes. And so kind of like growing into what they're told they
Yeah.
are. And I think the Raising a Healthy, Happy Eater does a nice job of saying, we're a learning eater, we're an exploring eater. My taste buds may not like it yet, or my taste buds still need more practice.
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh, picky eating, or you're such a bad eater. Again, I'm using air quotes.
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot. And so again, we don't want to set children up to fulfill those because it's our role. We're all still learning. Children haven't been exposed to a lot of things and they can't learn to like them if we don't support them in that endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so instead of picky eating, we can talk about learning eaters or exploring eaters, things like that. We've talked about being objective, maybe using our senses. That's a good guide of how to be more objective about food. I think the real challenge here is like we want to support children in eating nutritious foods and the types of foods that are readily available or acceptable sometimes or oftentimes aren't a match with that. And so wanting to support or encourage without being too pushy, there's kind of this fine line. And so one more thing I could think about is helping children link how they feel when they eat certain foods. If you're like, oh, if they want to eat a lot more of something, you're like, well, remember the last time you ate that and how you felt? Or like I'm thinking about children who are being active and maybe they're wanting a snack before or after an activity. So kind of telling them, oh, let's try some cheese and crackers. That will give you some energy and help keep you fueled as you practice or play your game or something. So providing that reasoning in ways that they can, as you mentioned earlier, developmentally understand.
Yeah, and in a way that they can connect with it and link it. So essentially saying these foods will fuel you to be strong for practice, whatever it may be.
I love that. One more thing, because we kind of talked about this could be a tough topic, right? Things we've talked about so far are not maybe a list challenging, but under the surface, it might be our experiences with food or even body image, because food in our society is so closely linked with body image. I don't think we can get away talking about this topic of reframing how we talk about food without acknowledging that. And so just wanted to hear your thoughts on like the personal relationships that we have with food and how we can approach that in a more positive light.
Yeah, so I know a lot of it depends on how you were raised or the people that you are surrounded by, how they talk about food. A lot of times we just absorb that and then either project it back out or just internally absorb that. And so kids are the same way. They can, even if you're not intentionally saying it directly to them, they can hear these things and absorb it. So really, like we talked about the food morality piece and not labeling foods good or bad, not only for your child because they're hearing it, but also internally whenever we can kind of flip this switch and recognize that all foods provide some source of fuel. So just recognizing that and not putting any sort of stigma or shame with foods around it.
Yeah, and pleasure, right? I think that's where a lot of the guilt or shame comes into play, is that we feel pleasure about foods that have been labeled as quote unquote unhealthy or bad or things of that nature. And so we'll in future episodes kind of talk about how to fit all of those foods together. But I really appreciate your perspective on that. And I think one of the things mentioned in the How to Raise a Mindful Eater that was really helpful was when they were talking about body appreciation. Because children are at such moldable, shapeable, vulnerable periods as they grow. I'm specifically thinking of adolescents and the people we've heard of who have expressed to us the concerns they have with adolescents and how do we talk about food and how do we promote a positive body image. And Tracy Tilka, in here, the quote is that holding favorable opinions toward the body, regardless of its appearance, accepting the body along with its deviations from societal beauty ideals, respecting the body by attending to its needs and engaging in healthy behaviors, and protecting the body by rejecting unrealistic media appearance ideals. Body appreciation is about having a deep and respectful relationship with your body. And I don't know that many of us have reached that point, or if we have, it probably has been a little bit later in life and maybe not earlier.
Yes, I think that's something that everyone can work on, whether you think you have reached that point, still working towards that and expressing it so that others around you can hear that way. And then also starting at a young age and supporting young boys and girls so that they appreciate their body for all that it does, regardless of how it looks.
Absolutely. Focusing on capabilities. And you could link that with food again, like we talked about. This is how this food will support what your body can do. And again, pushing back. We talked about this with food advertising, but helping, just having honest conversations about, you know, either things that we're working through or just what we notice in society, that messaging. I think that's a way that we can start to really make ripple effects of changes when in the ways that we talk about food.
Yeah, absolutely. In How to Raise a Mindful Eater, they talk about having a conversation about it, not making the conversation strictly about weight or specifically about food, but also not ignoring the topic completely and just having a conversation that everyone looks different and that's okay. That's a beautiful thing.
And I think letting people know, getting others on board, because it can feel like a lonely task when you're when you're trying to pull the boulder uphill, so to speak. And so family, friends, if people have similar ideas for you, great. If not, letting them know. And I just think of an example in our family somewhat recently, a comment was made about a body size or just clothes, the way they fit. And my daughter was standing around and I just said, you know, we're really focused on accepting bodies and celebrating them for all shapes and sizes. And so I helped reframe, like, you didn't like how the shirt fit you, rather than like, you know, a more negative comment about one's own body. Let's make it about the shirt. Our bodies are our bodies. And so that's one example. It felt tough, but I felt really proud in that moment because my daughter actually made eye contact with me. So it was like, okay, she's been hearing me and I was able to show her in action how we can do that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Okay, so I think we've been talking long enough. So maybe let's just quick summarize. We're talking about more positive ways. And again, it doesn't have to be like smiley faces. Neutrality is a more positive way than the negative framing we say, where this is going to kill you or it's going to cause all these issues. And so reframing and what foods can do for our bodies, helping children link that. And some of those great opportunities for doing that include
the grocery store when you're or after the farmer's market or your local market, wherever you are getting food, and providing that education without it feeling like education. And again, talking about food in different ways, engaging our senses, and then as they get older, linking to the different body functions or whatever that connection piece may be for them, but providing that education when you're shopping for food in the garden, if you have that opportunity, and with that advertising whenever it's all around us.
Yeah, and then just keeping it objective, not making it about us as the adults. So I think our challenge for those moving forward, and I'm with you, with everyone on this as well, is thinking about what kind of food culture we want for the children that we're caring
Yeah.
for and ourselves. And this is a real opportunity to make some small but impactful changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So if you want resources or additional links, we've got those in our show notes to help guide you through making some of those changes in your life, or connecting with your local extension office for more opportunities for hands-on practice.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope you'll join us again.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Snack Club. Resources related to the topics discussed in this episode can be found on our website, linked in the show notes. Your local cooperative extension office is also a wealth of information and can provide links to local resources.
If you have other topics you would like to hear about, send us a note at snackclub@uky.edu. That's snackclub@uky.edu. And as a reminder, the digestible bits of information we share are like navigation signs for your feeding journey, but you may need to contact a healthcare provider for more personal advice.
And last but not least, special thanks to our team behind the scenes, Mindy McCulley for bringing this audio and video file to life with her technology skills, and to the people through her marketing magic, and to Kelly Thompson for her creative ability to turn one conversation into our Snack Club symbol.
We hope to see you again soon.